Hello, this video covers how to use a Texas Instrument TI83 and TI84. The first thing you need to know is what's the difference between a TI83 and a TI84. Well, in terms of functionality, the TI83 and the TI84 are pretty much the same. The TI84 has got a faster processor in it, and you can get all sorts of colored covers for it. This happens to be a gray-white combination, but there's plenty of colors out there to choose from. The other thing is that in terms of color is the second button here. The button is in the same place on the TI83, but on the TI84 it's blue, the TI83 it's yellow. The alpha key on the TI84 is a slightly different shade of green. Overall though, barring those things, the calculators are very, very similar. And you don't really need to worry about having to get a TI84 if you have a TI83. So I want to take a look here at what this little program that I have here does. It's got some cool supplemental features. So what you can see here is I just clicked on the spot right over here and I get something where if I'm graphing I can see an equation, the table that equation makes, and the graph that equation makes without ever having to click table or graph over here. Pretty handy, but I'm not going to use it right now. I just wanted to show it to you, and in the next videos we'll start to use that more. The other thing is, as you look at this screen right here, is this records keystrokes. So if I type in 1, 2, 3 plus 6, you can see what I've just typed in. So if I hit enter and then I hit the clear screen and you're wondering where the heck things are, well, you can look back up at the screen over here and see what I've done last. And I'll try to every once in a while clear this so it's clear as to where we are, because otherwise it just looks like a bunch of random buttons. So those are the basics here. Let's talk about turning this calculator on and off first, because that gets us practicing some of the functions on this. First, you turn the calculator on by clicking the on button. This may come to no surprise to you, but I just wanted to state it anyway, because the next one is going to rely on the side button. If I want to turn this calculator off, I have to hit second and then the on button, but it's not going to really be the on button. Right above it is the letters off in blue, which corresponds to the second button. So if I click it again, it should turn the calculator off. Now you'll notice on my calculator it did not turn off. That is because this is a computer emulation of the calculator, and I think if it turned off it just might crash on us. But on your calculator it should turn off. So let's talk about some of the other keys on here and some of the other things that this calculator has. This calculator can calculate any kind of trig. Its inverse is in the blue. It can calculate powers, which is this caret key. So for instance, if I want 2 to the third power, 2 to the third power is 8. I click enter and it should give me 8. There we go. Add, subtract, multiply, and divide on the right hand side. You have a squared button, which is really handy. If I wanted to know something squared is, I can just quickly click the squared button and it will square whatever's previous to it, and I get 49. Now let's say if I wanted to take the square root of something, I hit second and then the squared button, because if you look above it, it's got the square root. So let's see what the square root of 49 is. So there's a lot of functions on here, and then the opposites operations right above it. So like squared and square root, natural log and e, log and 10 to the x. Those are all things that correspond to each other. Some of the things I want to make sure that you all have the same as me right now are in our mode key. So if you could click mode, and let me try that, let me do that again just to make sure you're all in the same spot. If I click mode, I should see this screen right here. Now very well may be that you have a different set of selections on there. So let me show you what I think is typical to see changed on these calculators so that you can fix it in case it isn't correct. So I'm just going to get back up in the top. You'll notice that it says there's modes here of normal, scientific, and engineering. Just leave it on normal. Float. This is about decimal rounding. Let's say I have a number like 1/16 and I take 1 and I divide it by 16. Well, the answer is 0.0625. If I put it to 4 decimal places here, I'll see all 4 of those. If I put it to 3, I'll get a rounded answer to 3 decimal places. If I put it to 2, same thing, rounded answer to 2 decimal places. If I put it to 9, what I'll get is 0.0625 and 5 more zeros behind it. But if I put it on float, what will happen is whatever number of decimal places there are to show, the calculator will show maximum 9. So I'll click enter there, and now my calculator is on float. The other thing that's typically changed is radian and degree. Typically this calculator likes to be on radian unless otherwise noted. So it's better to keep it on radian because it may make some mistakes in your calculations from time to time. Unless you're doing with trig, of course, and then you want to like move back and forth between degree and radian mode. You want to make sure that it says function, connected, sequential, real, and full. So the real basic, more important thing here is this. Everything on the left-hand side should be highlighted. If you have a TI84, you'll notice there's a clock there, and you'll notice that my clock is off. It says October 12th, 2013. Well, I can tell you that no matter how many times I try to set the clock, it always tends to go off. There's some kind of error with it. It just doesn't seem to work right. And so the clock really is not an issue to worry about. If you have a TI83, you don't even have the option. So once I have this done, how do I get out? Well, this is one of the more important things I'm going to teach you right now, and that is how to get out of just about anything that you're in, any kind of menu. What you do is you hit second, and you notice over here that there's an arrow button inside a cursor. That indicates that you've hit the second button, and now all the blue keys above the main keys will be what you use. So right above mode, it says quit. And quit is what you want to do. So we're going to hit mode and it's going to quit. So I'm back to the home screen. This is the basic main screen. So we just showed a couple basic things here. Another way to deal with some numbers is delete. Let's say I have 5,000. I wanted to write 597 and I wrote 598. I can arrow back, hit delete, and then put 587 in there. Or if I hit clear, though, what happens is I clear the whole entry. So delete helps you get more fine-tuned. It helps you arrow over and delete specific parts. Let's say I didn't want that 8 there. I hit delete. Let's say I wanted to put a 5 in there instead. Well, it accidentally wrote over that. So let me clear that again and show you what I'm talking about. So if I have the number 59 and I want to put, it should have been 589, and I want to plug in an 8 in between the 5 and the 9, here's another really cool trick. If you hit the second button again, and again, if you look at your cursor, you'll notice that there's an arrow button in there. That tells you that second is engaged. If you go over to insert, which is kind of like the opposite of a delete, I click insert, you'll see that it goes in underlining. So I click the 8 there, and all of a sudden it's 598 has been entered into the calculator. A couple other things I want to show you here. One of the cooler things is we have these square roots and all these other nice things, but if I click my math button, so I just clicked my math button, let me do that again. So I'll quit out, second quit, and I go over to math. I get all these different functions here. This function here turns any decimal into a fraction. This turns any fraction into a decimal. This raises something to the third power. This takes the third root. This takes the x root. In other words, I can put any root I want in. Min and max, more calculus based, or higher end algebra 2. There's a bunch of different functions here that you can use, and if you want to use some other things like absolute value, min, max, and things of that nature, complex issues with complex numbers, or if you want to deal with probability, here's a bunch of probability functions. And all of them are under the subheading math. So now, how do we get out of this menu? Let's say I didn't want anything that's in here. I hit second, quit, and then I'll be back to the home screen. So I've jumped around in the menu for math. There's another menu to deal with here, and this one's called catalog. So if I hit the second and then 0, what you'll see is a catalog of every single function that this calculator can do in alphabetical order. That is a tremendous amount of stuff. It's a long list, and if you tried to arrow through all the way to the Z's or the M's or whatever, it would take forever. So there's a cool trick here. As you'll see here in the upper right hand corner, there's got an A inside the box, which that means is that the alpha key is engaged. If alpha is engaged, then I look for the letter that I'm looking for. Let's say if I wanted to find out max, I look under M. So under the division key is the green letter M. I hit that, and I can scroll down and find the max as something. I can find the mean, the median, and then a whole bunch of other fun and exciting things. So wherever I want to go in the catalog, I just hit the letter that I'm interested in to see if there's anything in the T's. There is. What about the S's? Okay, I can go wherever I want and just find different functions that the calculator has. So if I'm having a hard time finding it the normal way, I just go to the catalog down here. So how do I get out of here again? Second, quit. So now I'm back to the main screen once again. So I've showed you catalog and math, two very handy things to know about. Um, Now let's talk about real quickly what graphing's about. So if I look up here, I've got all bunch of graphing and table type things. The y equals is a place where you enter equations that are solved for y. Window tells you what the dimensions of the window are of the graph. So I'll click on graph here for a second, and you can see that I have a graph here. And what are these dimensions? Well, if I click window, I can find out. And it looks like x goes from -10 to 10 with one tick for every value. So there should be 20 ticks on the graph going on the x-axis. And so if you counted all of these, you'd see 20. Then if you take a look at zoom, zoom has a bunch of different features on it. We can zoom in, zoom out, z-square, zoom decimal, z-square, z-standard, z-trig. There's a bunch of standardized zoomings that you can do. It's very handy. Trace allows you to select a graph and then follow it by connecting to the graph, and just tells you what coordinates x and y are there. You hit the graph button and the graph comes up if there's something in there to graph. Now notice all the second keys. So above it I have what's called stat plot, and we'll worry about that later. Table set, that's very handy with dealing with tables. It helps you decide where you want to start your table, if you want to start at 0 or -20 or whatever. Then if I click on second zoom, I get format. And in that spot, you can change, turn off the x and y coordinates. You can change the graphing system to a polar graph coordinates, or anything you really want to do. The standard or default is to have all the left hand side highlighted. That is the best way to go. So how do I get out of here again? Second, quit. So real briefly, I just talked about the graphing functions a little bit here. If I hit second calculate, there's a bunch of things I can do. I can find a min, a max, I can find a zero, I can find a value, I can find an intersection, and then some calculus functions down here as well. And there's more if you arrow down. If I click second table, had I entered an equation, I could see the graph, but I could also see a table of that equation as well. So then I would have three interpretations of mathematics. I'd have a graphical, a table, and an algebraic version. So this is a very handy place to be when you want to find out some details about the data. Last but not least, I want to talk about the x variable. So how do I clear out of here? I hit second, quit. This right here represents all variables, x, t, theta, and end, that are typically input. The inputs I'd like to talk about are usually domain or range. The x values are typically input, domain, or range. What's interesting here is if I click this button right now, a variable is supposed to not really have a value to it. But if I click the x and then I click enter, it tells me that x is 10. And that can get very confusing for some students. X is really not 10. What has happened is I have stored in a memory the number 10, and I use the variable x to store it. So what I'm getting at here is you have memory on a lot of calculators, and typically with memory you can only remember one number or store one number for yourself. In this case, you can store a lot more numbers, for every letter in the alphabet, in fact, at the bare minimum. For instance, if I want to change what the value of x is, I can change it to -5. And so I type in -5, I click the store button, and then I click the variable. And so now x is -5. And how do I know? I click x in, and I click enter, and x is -5. So if I needed to have a number memorized for just a minute, I can just store it as easily as that. So you get the store button there, which allows you to store it there. Now if I wanted to store it anywhere else, like say I wanted to store 6, I could click store, and then I want to use, say, the letter U. Then I click alpha, which the alpha is indicated up here as being engaged, and then I click 5, which is where the U is. So alpha is now, or I'm sorry, U is now 6. That doesn't mean the variable x is actually worth -5, or the variable u would be worth 6. It's just a way of storing numbers. So this concludes the basics of what you need to know about the calculator. You can screw around, play with a lot of buttons here. It's hard to get in trouble really with these calculators, but if you do, you can always ask me later.